Welcome to Redesigning the Dharma. I'm your host, Adrian Baker. Today I'm speaking with Jess McNally. I became aware of Jess because we have common teachers in Minyak Rinpoche and Sokmi Rinpoche. But Jess is very involved with the organization, not just a practitioner, but actually a facilitator in Minyak Rinpoche's Tergar organization, helping to even lead retreats now. These Tergar retreats are a relatively new and exciting opportunity for people studying with Minyak Rinpoche. So I'm looking forward to sharing this conversation with Jess with you all. And before I do that, I'm just going to briefly read her bio to give you some background. Jess McNally has devoted much of her adult life to practicing and studying Buddhism. After completing both a bachelor's and a Master of Science degree in Earth Systems at Stanford University, she moved to Zen Mountain Monastery near New York, where she lived and trained for over 3 years. During that time, she completed over 40 week-long silent retreats, sesshin. In 2015, she decided to pursue Tibetan Buddhism and was ordained as a monastic by Trungpa Rinpoche. She met Minyak Rinpoche shortly afterward at Tergar Monastery in Bodh Gaya, India. Under his guidance, she completed a series of solitary retreats in Tenzin Palmo's cave in the Himalayas, including a 5-month retreat over winter. Since 2016, Jess has also been a student of Sokmi Rinpoche. In 2018, Jess chose to return to lay life in her hometown of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Jess serves as a senior Tergar facilitator and host for online Tergar retreats and workshops. She also runs her own web design business. In her downtime, she loves to go on adventures outside with her dog Pema, sing, and cook. And with that said, please enjoy my conversation with Jess McNally. Well, thanks, Jess. Appreciate you making the time to speak with me.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to start by, I will have read your bio for the audience, but if you want to start just giving a little bit of, a brief context for who you are and what you do before we go into your journey and how you got there.
Yeah, so I live in Canada, in Calgary, Alberta. I'm from here. I grew up here. I always, there's so many different parts to my story. I never know where to start. But basically, in brief, I am a Buddhist practitioner of a long time, and I teach meditation within the Tergar meditation community, which is the students of Minyak Rinpoche in the West, primarily. And I was ordained as a Buddhist nun for a long time, so I started in the Zen tradition after university, and I lived at a Zen monastery in New York called Zen Mountain Monastery. I lived there for about 3 years, and then I switched to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition now about 10 years ago, and I got ordained in the Tibetan tradition and did a lot of solitary retreat when I was ordained. And I moved to Madison, Wisconsin. I was involved with the Center for Healthy Minds that's run by Richard Davidson for a year, and then I decided to disrobe, return to lay life, and I moved home to Canada. And that was about 6 years ago now. And so now I run my own website design business, and I teach meditation really as a passion, and I practice still quite a bit. And outside of that, I'm kind of a regular person. I have a dog, and I'm quite active. I really love sports, so I've always been an athlete. And it's a little bit about me.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
How about we start with, how'd you get interested in meditation in the first place?
Well, somehow very young, I was interested in meditation. And this is a Buddhist podcast, so I think I can say, I feel like I had some kind of imprint or something, because I was very interested in Buddhism from a young age for reasons that are kind of unexplainable. Like, nobody in my family is Buddhist, and my family's kind of Christian / non-practicing Christian. But I always had this interest, and I don't know exactly where it came from. I try and pinpoint where, but then it grew. I read certain books that really inspired me as a teenager, like Siddhartha, and this book about it was called A Fire in the Snow, and it was about a monk who had lived in a prison camp in China and his life journey, and that really inspired me. And I just kept sort of seeking things out, but it was at the beginning it was very kind of vague, I'm interested, and then I was sort of looking and trying to find something, and it took a long time between being interested, and then finally like establishing a meditation practice and feeling like I really am a kind of identifying as a Buddhist outwardly. Like, I don't know, sort of all of my teen years, it was like I was interested and dabbling, but hadn't quite found anything yet. And then finally in university was when I really got into it. The Dalai Lama came to visit my university, and I was quite inspired by him. And then I found a Zen center that was close to Stanford and started going there. And I had a boyfriend who meditated, and like it just sort of built from there. And that's how it got going. And I started a meditation group on Wednesdays that was like meditation and soup on Wednesday nights. And so in college, people would come over on Wednesdays, and me and my boyfriend make a big pot of soup, and we'd meditate for 15 minutes, and then we'd have soup. And it became really popular. There was like 30 or 40 people would come every week for soup meditation. And so that was my first sort of meditation community. But I look back and I didn't really know what I was doing. Like, I was just counting the breath because I'd read about how to do that in a book. And slowly, they finally went to Zen Mountain Monastery. And that's where I really felt like, oh, this is my teacher. This is my community. And I moved in, and that was about a year after I graduated I did an undergrad, a master's. And then about a year after I finished my degree, I moved into the monastery. And that's when I was really became quite deeply involved. But it was like a slow journey of finding my way there.
And how did you go from, you just finished this graduate program, and then you're like, you know what? Though I know I went back to grad school for this degree and perhaps a particular vocation, I actually want to be in a monastery. I'm asking this because though I wasn't in a monastery, I've got, had my own version of this. And I'm sure a lot of other people do when they're kind of at that inflection point in their own practice in life. So I'm curious what kind of really tipped you in that direction. And then once you got there, what you just alluded to, like what really felt right about the Zen Center.
There were lots of things happening simultaneously in university and grad school, and I was studying environmental science and climate change. And my very first semester at university, I was at Stanford in California, and my very first semester, Al Gore came and gave his talk on An Inconvenient Truth, which hadn't been made into a movie yet. And I remember just being blown away by that talk and feeling like climate change is the most important issue of our time. And so kind of all my university studies were around that topic somehow. I basically went to the student advisor and said, I want to be involved in studying climate change or making a difference in this area. And so I studied climate change through the lens of ocean sciences, because at the time, climate change, a lot of the science was really about how will the ocean absorb the heat and how will the ocean react to climate change. I got to the end of my undergraduate studies, and I thought I would keep studying oceanography, but I got a bit disillusioned. I felt like there's lots of science out there now that climate change is real. And this is 2009. And I think the vast majority of Americans still thought that climate change didn't exist. And so I felt like that wasn't a failure of science, but a failure of communication. And so I went into science communication. I designed my own master's around that topic. And so that's what I was doing my master's degree in. And I graduated and got a job at Wired magazine for their science section, and thought, this is the greatest. I've got this perfect job and I can do this perfect thing. And I had so much optimism and so much I don't know, bit of naivete, I think, coming out of university, which I loved, and being sort of in the real world of journalism. And I think I was really disillusioned by how news and was just about views and popularity and kind of churning out this short form journalism. And I think simultaneously through my studies in school, I'd become more and more, I don't know, I think I had eco-depression just this sense of like total overwhelm and despair about our world and where it was going and how to change behavior, how we can collectively actually do something positive. And simultaneously, like around that same topic, I'd become very interested in community living. In part because I think one of the problems of our ecological consumption, overconsumption, is that we're all living alone. We all have our own car, our own laundry machine, our own everything, right? And we're also not very happy living alone. It's like a loneliness epidemic. We're learning more and more about this, but I was thinking about that in university, and I wasn't the only one, about how our modern lifestyle is not really that satisfying. And so community life, there's a lot of great things about it. You can share resources. You have a lot of social support and social structure that is very nourishing. And I felt like actually community life could do a lot to solve our ecological problems and our psychological, emotional problems. And so one of the things I did in university was I got a grant one summer to study different intentional communities all around the Western US. I went to tons of them. And in that sort of research about different communities, one of the things I found was that the ones that were spiritual seemed to be the most put together and functioning on all kinds of levels, like places where they had a really strong sense of shared values, shared direction, and clear sort of belief system. And ones that had actually like structure seemed to work better than like anarchist sort of eco communities. And also ones that were like very connected with the community, like either close to town or like had people coming, they seemed to be better off. And so all these things were like threads of what was going on in my life. And so I got disillusioned at my wired science job. I quit. I decided to go work on a farm in New Hampshire. And I think I just wanted to like do something tangible. And I was thinking about sort of becoming like a back to the lander, you know. I had this vision with my boyfriend at the time. We were going to like grow our own food and live our values and maybe have like an eco community somewhere. We're sort of hippies, you know, and I discovered that growing food is really hard. I have like the most respect for farmers you can imagine. They're just unbelievably hardworking and passionate about what they do. And it's really hard to grow food organically, especially. So when I was living at the farm is when I started going to the Zen Monastery. And the minute I arrived there, it was like all these things came together somehow, like my interest in Buddhism, which was sort of developing, and meditation, and the sense that like I really needed to find a teacher and people that could really teach me that like you can't really learn meditation from a book. And it's really hard to find a great teacher, actually. There's not that many wonderful meditation teachers, like really practiced meditation teachers in the world. And the community was so functional. And the people that I met who had lived there a long time, like some people have been there 20, 30 years, they just seemed so at ease in themselves and happy and friendly and well-adjusted. And I don't know, they just seemed very inspiring. And I thought, if that's the result of being here, I want to be like that. I felt like, yeah, it was very ecological living there also. Like you're living a simple life. You're not traveling around. So at the time, that was also very important to me. And I mean, it still is, I think about it, but I've kind of softened my views maybe a little bit. But yeah, it was just kind of fit a lot of different threads of what I was interested in. And because I'd been to so many different communities, when I arrived at Zen Mountain and saw how well it was working and how great the people were, and I just felt like I clicked. It wasn't like, oh, maybe I should keep looking around. It's like I'd already done a lot of looking. So when I arrived there, it was just very clear I wanted to keep going.
Nice. Nice. I want to hone in on one thing you said there a moment ago, which is the importance of having a good teacher. And it really wasn't just the kind of thing you could learn from books. And I want to zero in on that because I think a lot of people, we've got like a DIY culture, right, in the US or just the West, you know, and I think a lot of people, that's not intuitive to them, especially with like good meditation app. And there are some good ones out there, I think, you know, why can't I just learn this on my own? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I mean, apps are kind of this interesting in between because you have like, you sort of have a living person talking to you. But yeah, I mean, meditation is, in some ways, it's very simple, right? Like, it's not that complicated. And yet it's quite subtle to get it. It's easy to miss the main point. And I think meditation is like a little bit like an art form or like a sport. You learn how to meditate through the instructions, but you also learn kind of like by just being around someone who's been doing it a long time. From a great teacher, there's so much that's taught that has nothing to do with the words. It's about like how they are. Because when we're talking about meditation, it's not about what you're doing on your cushion. I mean, that's an important part of like the instruction and the practice, but like ultimately we're talking about transforming how you are all the time in every situation, in every moment. And otherwise, what's the point? You know, it has to be transforming your life. And I think when I'm around someone like my meditation teachers, it's like just seeing how they walk, seeing how they smile at people, seeing how they hold themselves, seeing how there's something that is like shared through that you can't get through a book or a podcast. And it's infectious somehow in a good way to the community and to me, like to the student. And there's also this sense of like it being like a living tradition that for me has become increasingly important the longer I've been in this path, which is this feeling that like meditation and the teachings are handed down from like human being to human being through time, and that to really learn it has to come from someone who's learned it and practiced it themselves, and it's held that way. And in an app, I think, I mean, it's not to say that apps can't help. I mean, they're a wonderful place to start, and so many people start with app. But I think there's a point where you're like, okay, now I want to go deeper. And to go deeper really helps to be able to talk to someone and be able to ask questions and say, this is what's happening for me. Am I going the right way? You know, what would you suggest? And to have them go, yeah, you're on the right track, or no, you've gotten lost here. You need to correct. And sometimes when you're on your own, it's hard to even know if you're veering off the track. And a podcast isn't going to tell you necessarily. Or like the app, Headspace, it's like the same, that's going to be the same meditation for everybody. But I think the longer you practice, the more you sort of have to learn like how to adjust yourself. And like, oh, I'm being too tight right now, I need to loosen up, or I'm a little too relaxed, I need to tighten, or maybe I'm a little too dull and I'm not quite getting it. So that kind of clarification, it's really helpful to have someone living, who's been there, you can talk to. Of course, there's different kinds of teachers too, right? Like, especially in our modern Tibetan Buddhist world, for example, like I have two main teachers, Mingyur Rinpoche and Sogyur Rinpoche, and they're both really, really busy, and they have tons and tons of students. And I can't just ask them about, well, my meditation's like this, what do you think? I hardly get to talk to them ever privately, and but then I have like, kind of think of them like spiritual friends, like teachers, mentors that are on the path but further down the path than me, and I can ask them. And and then, I mean, slowly over time, too, there's a point where you develop your own confidence. And then the relationship with the teacher changes over time because you feel more like I can adjust and learn what I need to learn. At the beginning, I remember like what I really needed from my teacher was just to have him say, carry on, you're on the right track, you're doing well, just that encouragement. The nice thing about living at the Zen monastery is like I was living with my teacher. So I got a lot of encouragement. Yeah.
I'm glad he was an encouraging teacher who believed in positive reinforcement.
Yeah, he really was. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So one thing, I'm just hearing in what you're saying, I think in a lot of ways, what it boils down to in essence is feedback. And I've really thought about this as a teacher. I was a trained teacher myself and taught in schools, and that was really emphasized. When we were being trained to be teachers, was that the number one thing research shows in terms of how people improve is feedback. And it talked about the apprenticeship model, and that's really how many people learn things. And so I think that's really what's missing from most apps. And that's one thing, for example, that really stands out, I think, about the Tergar offerings is that you have the opportunity to schedule an interview with a teacher.
Yeah, feedback is really important from the teacher and from the community. I mean, that's the other amazing thing about living in a community is you get a lot of feedback from the people around you. And I mean, of course, we get feedback in our world and our day-to-day life. If we're really going off the rails, usually our partner or family or friend will go, Jess, you're being an idiot. Feedback. But it's not maybe it's directed and specific to how we can improve from a meditation standpoint.
I want to ask, when Dharma gets translated to a secular approach, so people have talked about this a lot with the mindfulness movement. The joy of living is another good example. I think why taking a secular approach exists is sort of self-evident, which is there are a lot of people who can benefit from the teachings who really might not interact with them if they saw them as religious or from a religion different than their own. And I think for a lot of those within Buddhism, we really see that these are universal practices and insights we can have about the nature of mind. And so there's clear benefit in trying to translate it to a secular approach. I'm curious, in your view, what gets lost, if anything, when it is translated from a traditional approach to the secular approach, and particularly what gets lost that can be really beneficial, perhaps in your own experience or in what you've observed in others.
Yeah, so in Tergar, Mingyur Rinpoche sort of divided the path into two segments. And everyone starts with the joy of living, which is focused around awareness, loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom, like seeing things as they are. And those are all qualities that, like you said, everybody has. Everybody has awareness. Everyone has loving kindness and compassion. They may not recognize it. And everyone has this capacity for wisdom and seeing things as they are. And then beyond that, for those who are interested in Tergar, they go into something called the path of liberation. And that's when it's more explicitly Buddhist. But of course, the joy of living in many ways is very Buddhist. It's just, it's open to everybody, but it is also the foundations of the Buddhist path. And so it's sort of secular in the sense that it's open to everyone to join, whether you're Buddhist or religious or atheist or anything. And so that's been really wonderful. And we do get people who come from all different religious backgrounds and non-religious backgrounds, which, like you said, I think is great. But what does get lost, I mean, I think there's very specific things that we don't discuss in Joy of Living. And one is like, what happens when you die? All of that. What happens when you die? And everything afterwards, are you just dead? Or are you reborn? Or are you in heaven? I mean, that's really where religion, I think, comes to the fore, right? And I find the Buddhist view on death personally extremely helpful. And I think I would really miss that if that wasn't part of my worldview and my understanding of what life's about and where this is all going. So that's one piece that gets lost. And then, of course, what happened before you were born is also part of the equation on the other side. Where do you come from? Where have you been before? None of that gets discussed in the secular Buddhist world very much, because I don't think you can discuss that in a secular way. It just becomes another religious viewpoint. Even if the viewpoint is nihilism or atheism, that's just another religious kind of view in a way. And then I think the view on karma, which of course is part of what happens after or what happens before, is also what's happening every moment with your actions and what's the implication of that. And in the secular context, we usually don't talk about karma, but karma was like at the very heart of the Buddha's. An understanding of karma and cause and effect was so pivotal in the Buddha's own awakening, and really distinguished Buddhism from Hinduism and from what he'd been doing, the world that he'd come from in terms of his religious background. I also find karma extremely helpful as a concept. And then it ties into ethics. we don't talk a lot about ethics and joy of living and secular Buddhism, because in Buddhism, karma is the basis for ethics in many ways. And so we sort of hint on it in terms of like being kind and living with awareness. And the ethics come out of being in tune with your basic goodness and with who you really are. But there's a lot of interesting discussion about ethics that maybe we kind of de-emphasize, I think, in secular Buddhism. So I think those are the things that to me kind of stand out as the main things that get put aside. And then I think the other piece actually that for me on a day-to-day level is that in the joy of living, we don't talk a lot about refuge. And in Buddhism, that's really like pivotal also, is like taking refuge in the three jewels, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. And where are we putting our hope? Where are we putting our sense of reliance? Are we relying on our physical, material world, our family and friends, and our work, and I don't know, our self-identity and our bank account as like things that we can rely on? Are we relying on, are we kind of like turning our mind and hearts towards a reliance on the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the three jewels? I mean, that's something we don't discuss in the joy of living. And when we get into Tibetan Buddhism, it gets even more like a sense of like really relying on the guru and all the manifestations of that, and this sense of like kind of these other dimensions of reality that we can't see. And personally, I feel like I lean on that quite heavily in my day-to-day life. And I can't really imagine now having to like practice meditation without all of that stuff. So to me, it seems like a little bit of I don't know, like there's a reason I'm into the whole Buddhist thing, not just secular meditation. But I do think it's a really wonderful place. And for some people, that's like, I think it's so personal what people are looking for and what they want. And there's so much that we can learn just through practice with awareness, loving kindness, compassion. I mean, I love the joy of living. It's not to say that I don't, but I love all the other stuff too.
Thank you for that. I confess it was a leading question. I also agree with you that a lot gets lost, but I was, hoping you'd clearly lay out just for people to think about why they might consider, even if they still want to identify as an atheist or another religion or agnostic, studying something like Vajrayana online, Nectar of the Path, more formal tradition. And I think you said that very well. So thank you. I think one thing in particular I'd like to ask you to elaborate on is the idea of karma and why that might be helpful for people to understand, even people who might not necessarily believe in rebirth, reincarnation, because I think it gets conflated a lot. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you can talk about what the value of understanding karma might be, even for a atheist or a religious skeptic.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most helpful things about karma is that it really puts the power in your hands to change your life and your future. And there's a sense for me with karma that I'm no longer the victim of my life and kind of a helpless passenger in my future voyage, like that I can't really control what's going to happen to me. And of course, there's a lot that we can't control. The causes and conditions, the world, right? Like I can't, I'm not saying that suddenly I have control of the world, but with karma, there's this feeling of like, if I can change my own mind, my own actions, my own way I react to the things happening to me in my life, and if the actions I do and my intention changes about what I'm doing, and I have a positive intention of wanting to do good things and be kind, that my future will be different. Actions motivated with a positive intention of love, kindness, wisdom lead to good results at some point in the future, even if they're not it's not, of course, that simple. Like, you can be the best person in the world and bad things still happen to you. But for me, it's been very helpful to feel like I actually have some capacity to shape my future. And of course, it's common knowledge also, like a kind of, we have an intuitive sense, like if I do good things, it will lead to good results. But then also, like, there's the other side of it is when difficult things are happening to me. With a karmic view, it's like, okay, this is the result of my past actions. And now I have a choice. I can either repeat the same kind of negative response that led to this happening. I can just keep having this happen again, like get super angry and react in a very negative way, or I can take whatever is happening and either just accept it or use it to generate love and compassion or to practice with, and have a sense that like now that negative karma is like ended, that cycle is now over. Whatever needed to happen, now I've made something useful of that obstacle, of that difficult challenge. To me, it's much nicer to feel that way than to just feel like the victim of life, to feel like, oh, everything that's happening to me is an opportunity to purify my negative karma from the past or generate positive karma for the future. And so I think in that sense, a karmic view is quite helpful.
And on a related topic, why contemplate death? And offering this perspective perhaps to a Western audience in cultures where, in my sort of experience comparing it to Asia, at least, we're really not encouraged to contemplate death and perhaps to kind of sweep it under the rug. You had mentioned that you found the Buddhist teachings on death very helpful, and I'm wondering if you could say more about that.
Yeah. Well, we're all going to die. It's unavoidable.
So there's that.
Why contemplate death? I mean, because it really highlights what matters in life when you remember and think about the fact that you are going to die. And you don't know when. Could be today, could be tomorrow. When you remember that life is short and precious, it really highlights like what is important. And I think on a day-to-day basis, it's very easy to get wrapped up in feeling super stressed out and anxious about all kinds of things. And when you think, like, what if I died tonight? Would this matter? It can be very clarifying, like, actually, not such a big deal. Feels like a big deal right now, but actually, it's not. And, things that are short-lived, we naturally know that they're have a sense of their beauty. Like, even I have a flower at my desk right now and it's opening up, and I know that it's only going to last today or tomorrow. And so it feels precious. It feels like extra beautiful. And I know like it was closed and it's just opened up today. And like, I know by tomorrow it may be dead. And so it's special and I appreciate it. And I think it's the same thing with our life. When we think it's going to last forever or forget that death is imminent, even if we don't know how imminent it is. It could be 50 years off or it could be less, It really makes us appreciate every day, even when it's a bad day and you're sick and it's raining and the bills are due and you don't have enough money or whatever is happening. When you think maybe this is my last day, suddenly it's like, wow, I'm just really grateful to be alive. And that can really like cut through a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and make us appreciate the people in our life too. My grandmother's 90 years old, and it's especially clear, like, who knows how long she has. She's in good health right now, but it really makes me appreciate when I have time to spend with her and to try and make that time meaningful. So we're not just watching a movie, but talking about things that matter and connecting heart to heart. And I don't know, trying to make the most of that time.
Yeah, one thing I'm hearing in your response is contemplating death can elicit a sense of perspective, also relaxation. And relaxation is something that's really emphasized a lot in Tibetan Buddhism, in other schools as well, but especially a path like Dzogchen or Mahamudra. And yet I think it can be tricky sometimes to impart that to people in this North American or Western culture or other cultures that are just very productivity, achievement oriented. people sort of think, okay, great. Now, like, how do I relax? I'm developing a plan. Like, what's the 80-20 on how I relax? And aside from contemplating death, I'm wondering how you guide students or practices you suggest for eliciting a more relaxed approach to meditation on and off the cushion.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think contemplating death can make us more relaxed about things that are maybe not as important and potentially more enthusiastic and energetic about things that we want to get done. You know, like if you realize, wow, I might not live forever and I really want to accomplish X, I better do it. I better not put it off till tomorrow, right? And so I think like the relaxation is sort of the relaxation towards like maybe things that are less important and putting things in perspective. And I think that relaxation is really connected to what we call wisdom, like seeing what's important and what's not important, seeing things as they really are. And when we talk about death, it's part of recognizing things are impermanent. And that's actually the quality of our world, you know. So everything is always changing. And I think like the other irony here is that I think people think contemplating death is really dour and sad. And actually, can bring a lot of joy. You know, when we're talking about the flower, like is joyful. Like life is beautiful, it's joyful. So recognizing death actually can make life more wonderful, happy, you know. So I think that's an irony that, you know, it isn't all sad. Yeah. But sorry, I'm not sure I answered your question.
It was the right answer. It's what you felt in that moment. And I also think it was very pertinent. I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Jess, I'm conscious of your time, and I just want to thank you so much for your time. And I want to give you an opportunity to let people know about any upcoming offerings you have and where they can find you.
Oh, thank you. You know, I just wish everyone all the best who's watching this. Thank you for taking the time to tune in. Thank you for being interested in meditation. And for me, I'm teaching a month-long retreat in September to October in Portugal. If anyone feels like coming for a month of retreat, it's going to be the whole Joy of Living path, 1, 2, 3, and all the homework. And so it's never been done before in this way, but Minyak Rinpoche, it was his idea. And so we're going to start mid-September to mid-October and be in retreat. And yeah, I mean, I would say for those who are like getting into meditation, maybe you've been doing this for a while and you've been listening to apps and you've been doing different things, making time to go on retreat, maybe not starting with a month, but a weekend or a week, it really, really makes a difference. Like when you're just practicing a little bit here and there and in the midst of your busy life, it's hard to feel like you're making much progress sometimes. And I think going on retreat, again, it's kind of like putting things in perspective when we're talking about death. I feel like going on retreat is kind of like sometimes it feels like a mini death because it's like you kind of leave everything behind that is normally your habits and you're distracting you and putting yourself in a different space where you're just practicing and kind of tuning inward instead of always focused outward. And it's amazing how when we give ourselves time to do that, and I've been in retreat with a lot of people, it's like you just blossom. Your natural qualities of love and kindness and awareness, wisdom, they just emerge spontaneously, given the space to do that. And it's so beautiful. I love retreat, and it can really inspire you to keep going. It's like not to always be in retreat, but you come back to your daily life and have a different perspective. And so for me, going in and out of retreat has been really, really important, which is why I've been so focused now on trying to create opportunities for people to do retreat. And I'm quite involved in something called Tergar Retreats, which is a new organization under Minyak Rinpoche that's focused on retreat practice. within the Tergar lineage. Yeah. So if you are interested in retreat, I'm always happy to talk about that. But that's sort of what I'm focusing on these days in terms of my teaching. And probably next fall, I'll start doing some online courses again when I get back.
Well, thank you so much for your time,
Yeah.
Jess. Really appreciate
Thank you. Thanks for
it.
talking.
Okay.